Like the other speakers have said, this paper was a collective effort of all 10 people. They come from across the island and they bring with them their different perspectives and their different experiences of migration. Some people had worked abroad before, others this was their first time. Some people had never left the country before, only on holidays. And there was also people from a range of academic backgrounds as well, from law to politics, languages and the arts. And whilst we didn't agree on everything, something that we could agree on was that we wanted the decision to migrate to be one of a personal choice of the migrant and not a decision that was taken as a result of force or necessity. But we asked ourselves, how would that be possible, and would it be possible to achieve by 2040? And each time we met as a group, we asked different questions of each other and come up with different answers to try and tackle some of the biggest migration issues today. So the effects of inward migration is obviously very topical at the moment. It was a staple sparring topic for Brexiteers and Remainers, and remains very topical as Brexit negotiations are taking hold at the moment. It was a core feature in elections recently in France and Germany, and the European refugee crisis has been on the news almost every evening for the past year. As climate change, global wealth inequality and war force people from their homes, will they be able to find refuge on the island of Ireland? And should Ireland be doing more on the international stage to address those underlying inequalities? We suggested that Ireland's tax structure could be looked at to help redress some of those imbalances in the system. As a member of the EU, we think Ireland should be doing more to seek a diplomatic solution to the refugee crisis. And as an island, we could commit more resources to disaster-stricken areas and areas where there are influxes of refugees. We also think that more could be done to oppose free trade agreements and structural adjustment policies that prioritise the bottom line over the social good. Outward migration has also been a common feature in Ireland over the past several hundred years. It's compounded in 2008 by the economic crisis. And we want to see what can be done by 2040 to foster opportunity at home, so we're not sending people away because of the lack of prospects. We looked at a universal basic income to see if that would provide more stability to the citizens of Ireland. And also, for those who want to get away, could the government do more to provide constructive opportunities in volunteering and studying abroad in the short term? We also asked if there was a better way for us to engage with diaspora abroad, perhaps extending voting rights for first and second generation Irish, and also how we might promote and maintain Irish culture across the world. Within Ireland, we asked how we might structure a compassionate immigration and asylum policy which balances the needs of the individual against the economic needs of the island. And we questioned the current system of support for asylum seekers and found it to be unfit for the needs of today. We believe that all asylum seekers should have the right to work while their claims are being processed, and the state should do more to support them during that process. We want the island of Ireland to be known globally for its social and cultural diversity, where we embrace and celebrate cultural expression of others, and where public life and public office reflect those in society. I hope you enjoyed reading the paper, and I hope it gave you something to think about over the next, where policy might go over the next 23 years. And thanks to the other 9 people who helped pull it all together.
Yeah, give us a wave actually, those others who, there they are. Great, we'll come to you shortly. And Hans, maybe any of your initial reflections on some of what Colm shared there, and broader issues raised around the question of migration for the island of Ireland?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you very much to the group. I think it's a really good paper. It's very creative. I think all in all, it's always a good idea to think long. I think in Ireland, we don't have a great tradition of planning ahead. Our political system tends to be very reactive. It's great when there's people like yourselves who put their minds together and think about the future and how best to anticipate it and prepare for it rather than let it happen. And I think the group really did an excellent job, both in terms of the breadth of the issues addressed and also the ambition that you had and the solutions that you've come up with. So well done. Now, as you can hear from my accent and my name, I'm a migrant as well. In fact, I'm a serial migrant. This is the 5th country that I'm an official resident in now. And whenever I hear debates about migration, I can't help but say, well, this is about me. Am I a problem? And the paper obviously sets out a vision. And I think it was Jonathan Swift said, a vision is about seeing what's invisible to others. So obviously the vision has to set out something that isn't yet there, and it's ideally it has some sort of a roadmap to it, and I think the group did that. But I think any good vision has to be coupled with an analysis of what the problem is that you're trying to envision a solution to. And I suppose we live in a post-truth society these days, and everybody on Twitter has an opinion and is an expert on everything, and less does analysis matter. You can have opinions, it almost looks, without actually having much of a knowledge of the fact or even a passing interest in the issue, as long as you can get it into 140 characters. But and as Colm said, migration is a really important issue. It is currently determining politics in Europe and even in the US. It is the issue that is on the table. It is being discussed. And unfortunately, I think, and I suppose I would say this working for a poet president, but words matter. Words are really important. And by using certain words, you buy in, or maybe unconsciously, into an analysis of what the problem is. And by using certain terminology, you almost inadvertently reinforce some of the opinions that people have and some of the ways in which we analyze the situation. Why I'm saying this is 2015, the Mediterranean refugee crisis, 135,000 people crossed the Mediterranean. That's a lot of people. 20 years earlier, in the let me just check for my notes, 1987, 70,000 Irish people crossed into the UK, migrants. Nobody called that a stream or an influx or a deluge of migrants. It was just something that happened. When twice that number of people crossed the sea into a much larger area, not into one country, but into 27 countries, we are calling it a crisis, we're calling it a flood and an unstoppable stream of refugees. So I'm not trying to belittle the crisis in the Mediterranean. I'm just saying that by choosing words, we're creating something or we're defining something as a problem. I started by saying, am I a problem? And I've come to the conclusion, no, nobody thinks that as a migrant, I'm a problem, because I'm white and middle class. And I'm living in a rich country. So migrants with education and money, they're welcome. Last year, 83,000 millionaires moved country. That's an awful lot of them. I think 20% of them went to Australia. Nobody's defining that as a problem, because actually 7,000 of those were Chinese millionaires. When it becomes a problem is when people wear a headscarf or they're poor and they're considered to be a burden on society, even though all academic literature on the issue shows that refugees are maybe a burden for at most 18 months on the host society, after which the net benefit is usually positive. So I think that this is really important, and why I'm saying this is because in the paper I think there's a certain number of phrases that are being used and implicitly I think accepting some of the analysis or some of the myths that exist about migration. And one of them is the confusion about migration, refugees, and economic migrants. I'm an economic migrant. Most of the people that left this island were economic migrants. And luckily, our history has been that we have been accepted in the countries that we moved to, with a couple of exceptions, and particularly historically. Most of the people who came to Ireland in the recent years were still white. Most of them were Catholic. So there has been a remarkable little friction in Ireland addressing this. But I imagine if the same number of Lithuanians, as we have, if Lithuanians came into this country, were Syrians, would we still be talking about or not talking about migration. So anyway, this is ending up with a very long answer to your short question. But so I wanted to say, well done. I think it's a really important issue, but I think let's be very careful about the words we use. I mean, when we talk about migration, last year, I think there were 244 million migrants around in the world. That includes 65 million people forcibly flee or forced to flee their country. So I'm delighted that the group took that as as a starting point almost to say, well, how can we avoid that having to happen to 10 times the population of this island? People have been forced to leave their own country. That's not even counting the people who are in what we call internally displaced people, so people who've been forced to flee their home but haven't crossed an international boundary. Out of those people forced to flee, 22 million people were refugees, i.e. or asylum seekers. So these are people who are recognized internationally as refugees. And Colin brought up the Brexit debate and the elections in places like France and Germany. And it's really worrying how people just tend to sort of put all of these categories of people into one. It's all due to the refugees, and when the numbers really are very small. Particularly the numbers here in Ireland, we have been enormously insulated from global trends on this. We are really at odds, partly because we're protected by this Dublin Convention, which basically says that the first country of port of call in the EU that you arrive at as an asylum seeker is the country that you're supposed to be seeking asylum in. So Ireland, there's very rare, very few flights or boats from troubled countries. Last point, because I know I'm going on. I think the group was delighted also that basically the opening sentence in the paper was, well, we need to address the root causes of migration. Now that, I think, of forced migration or unsustainable migration is a very important qualification of that. And the problem with that is it is extremely complicated. I have spent most of my time working in overseas aid. One of the arguments we would lazily make for overseas aid is that social development, economic development has a net benefit on migration, as in it stops people from being forced to leave. But it doesn't necessarily stop migration. In fact, you could argue it increases the opportunity for migration. When people are richer, they can actually afford to travel. A lot of people can't afford to travel. So there are no quick fixes. And I think it's really important that a group like yours has picked this topic, first of all, has spent a lot of time thinking about it and has come up with ambitious plans to address it, and thank you for that.
Thank you, Hans. And maybe just in the interest of time, I'm actually going to throw it open to the floor to any questions or comments from the wider team who were involved with the migration paper. If not, I've got a question of my own, but thought I'd throw it to you guys first. Well, okay, great, yeah, go.
I'm Colin and I was part of the migration team.
Oh, super.
Part of our paper was about engaging the Irish diaspora and the referendum of extending the franchise for presidential elections is something that obviously you'll have been discussing at the Horus. Can you give some insight into how realistic it is on our ambition to kind of really engage the Irish diaspora, and is there space for the Irish government and the Horus to sort of expand their engagement there?
Okay, I have to say I have a personal opinion here, and it's completely discordant with most of the commentators here. I'm a Dutch citizen. I still am a Dutch citizen. I haven't applied for Irish citizenship because I would lose my Dutch citizenship. As a result, I have a vote in the Netherlands. Now, I haven't lived in the Netherlands for 24 years. I don't know anybody in the Netherlands or in the political scene. I am not bound by any of the laws that the Parliament of the Netherlands passes. Why should I have a vote? I think it's ridiculous. I have 2 votes in the European elections. I have an Irish vote and a Dutch vote. I systematically don't use the Dutch one because I just think it's wrong. I do not believe that I should have a vote in a country that I have only historic ties with. That's my personal view. I think I would be very keen for people like me, who I've been here 16 years, I've been paying taxes for all of those 16 years. I am bound by the laws of this land and I have no vote here. I think it would be wise or interesting to start a campaign to see, can we extend the franchise to people who have been in this country X number of years, who are bound by the laws in this country. So I told you it's a discordant view. Obviously, I'm not saying that it is not valid to reach out to the Irish diaspora. But if I were to prioritize one or the other, I would prioritize the people who live in this country and who have a stake in the future of this country more directly than people like myself have in the stake of the future of the Netherlands.
Yeah, at the back.
Can I just maybe ask a follow-up question directly to that then? So if you're a Dutch citizen and you don't want to give up your Dutch citizenship, even though you don't live in the country and you haven't lived there for 16 years and you're not able to, or you choose not to exercise a right to vote, why would you not just take your Irish citizenship up instead, and then kind of, if it's just to start ties, like if they don't mean that much?
Well, obviously I have family still in the Netherlands, and I'm starting to reconsider my views, all right, because certainly the football in the Netherlands is disastrous these days, so I might just switch allegiance. But I think the serious point is, what makes you eligible to vote? Is it the colour of your passport, or is it that you're part of a society? And I don't think it should be tied to nationality, for the reasons that, like, if I'm just abroad for a couple of months, or if I'm abroad for a couple of years, there is a difference. And I think it should be tied to whether you have a stake in the decisions that are up for election. So, and I'm actually part of a campaign in the Netherlands to address this ridiculous situation that you lose citizenship just because you choose another one. And my kids have two nationalities because they were born here, they have a Dutch citizenship. So the strange thing is that you can have dual citizenship, but not if you choose it. So, and I think in the Netherlands is one of the few countries where that is the case. So I still feel Dutch. I can't get rid of this accent, but I don't think I should have to be put in a place to have to choose between allegiances. But yeah, if I'm here another 20 years, I might just say, well, look, I am actually feeling so disenfranchised. I might do it, but at the moment, my wife is very clear on this, that I should have changed citizenship long ago. And it is ultimately, I think, just an emotional call. But I think the valid point is about, well, who should be voting in a society, and I don't think it should necessarily be linked to a passport.
And I have a question more around back just to the paper, and you started off talking about this idea of immigration as a choice and not a necessity, and talked about Ireland as having the capacity to be a place to welcome for migrants. I wondered whether you guys talked about that idea of, like, there is capacity, but then there's probably a point at which we say, actually, our services, our infrastructure, our housing, how do we kind of balance that of welcoming migrants to come to Ireland, but then also understanding there's limit on that and maybe some kind of requirements around that. Did you think about that?
Yeah, so it certainly was something that we had quite a long discussion about, but we had found that if the population of the island reached, I think it was 10 million, it would still be underpopulated per square kilometre compared to England and Holland. So we thought there's definitely room to grow, but that obviously needs to be supported with infrastructure. There needs to be jobs and opportunities if people come here. And another part in the paper we talked about capping that each year, and we didn't come up with a figure as to what that might be, but that there was some need for a control on the amount of people who come in, to ensure that the people who came here, that there was a sustainable way to, like, find them a job, find them housing, so you don't end up in a situation where people are almost worse off coming here than if they didn't.
I think this is a really important point, and it links back to the discussion of the previous group as well. It's about planning, and I think, I suppose one thing that's absent from the paper is class. most of it's relatively easy for a person like me who's middle class and has a job to discuss it and say, oh yeah, migration is a good thing. My job isn't being threatened by people who have just arrived to the country. And if you just look at where, there's a lot of the tension in Europe that you have around migration is that people who are, at the losing end of society, they are feeling threatened. Whether it's rational or not is a different discussion, but that seems where a lot of the stress seems to come from. And if we're planning a migration situation, and for instance, the way we treat refugees that arrive here, we put them in places where there is already no jobs anyway. So even if people try to integrate there, they won't be able to find a job in Ballahadreen. And then what you essentially are doing is you're setting up an increase of tension. Rather, I think you need to. We can do a lot better in terms of regional development and regional planning, and stopping this enormous focus and concentration of resources and services in the Dublin area, and really take regional development a lot more seriously here.
Time for one more question.
Hello, I'm Kathleen, and I'm also on the migration paper. I just want to make a comment on what you were saying about the type of language. I actually do agree with you. I think that the language that has been used here in Ireland, especially stuff that I've noticed, not just in the newspapers, but by politicians and by people, as you said, in the Twitter comments and Facebook comments, the language that people have against people coming into the country. As you said, it's kind of like they're taking our jobs, but it's not just that. They expect people to assimilate, not to integrate, but to become, if you want to live here, then you have to be exactly like us. They have tried to do that with Irish Travellers, which is also another part of the newspaper as well, non-transit sites. There was an assimilation policy in 1963 called the Itinerary Commission Report that literally tried to get travellers to be exactly like settled people. And they're trying to do that in different ways to migrants and refugees that are coming into this country. If you want to stay here, then you have to look and act exactly like us. And that part of that started coming from the top, because the only way to change the mindset of the people on the ground, yes, of course, talk to people on the ground, but it needs to come from people in power, because those are people who are influencing the ideas of people on the ground.
That's a great comment. And actually, I think it's come back to what you were saying, Hans, before around the power of the language and the words that we use. And actually, you raised a great point, I think, around that assimilation and integration. If you come here, then you have to be like us and behave like us. And it actually links back to our first conversation around cultural identity. And with migration, we'll actually have a much richer culture and tapestry in Ireland. Keen to kind of hear maybe just some closing remarks from you guys around how you manage that dynamic of embracing migrants and new cultures, and kind of mediating that with the rhetoric that in the existing population you kind of have to manage as well. Easy.
Without doing a carbon copy of the previous panel, it is that education piece when it comes to integration, and it's a focus in the paper. It's about educating people from a young age and ensuring that the education system is integrated and has that diversity of opinion, from preschool, primary school, secondary school, and right through to university. Ensure that you have that diversified curriculum, that you're not just studying local topics, and that you have that internationalized dimension to your education. I think that's got to be where it starts, so that people are prepared for that type of diversity.
I think that's a really good point. I think you like this as in communications, etc. But I think it's also about explaining some of the ground rules to ourselves. I'm really worried if you look at opinion polls across Europe, young people and their faith in democracy itself is diminishing year on year. People are starting to agree it's still in low percentages, but statements like, sometimes a leader should be given the space to make decisions without, Parliament interfering, or, we need to clear red tape and that sort of stuff. And a lot of young people actually seem to be agreeing with this. This is a worrying trend, I think, because, to me, that's how we undermine and fatally undermine democracy. And I think we're seeing current threats to that. And I think part of that is by being clear about what is happening and who is benefiting and who's not benefiting. And there's always people who don't benefit. And I think we have to educate ourselves why we have the state that we have and why we do have the laws that we have, because quite a lot of these things we just assume that everybody knows, but actually they're so important to our society because we have these rules for a reason, and we need to remind ourselves what that reason is. And then, if there are certain non-negotiables, so I'm a great believer in diversity. I absolutely agree with you. I think Ireland is a fabulously interesting place to live, and it is a lot more interesting, I think it is now, than it was a monoculture in the 1950s. But we have to be careful that we, remember what it is that we need to do to make it work, to make this diversity work. And it does mean that we have to, for instance, not always be tolerant to those who are intolerant. I think these are really important parts of the equation.
Thank you, Hans, and thank you, Colm. You can put your hands together for our final panel.